Okay, well, it is 7:03, so we'd better start. For you wonderful people that are turning out for a 7 o'clock panel, pretty miraculous, and with two amazing turn-off words, I don't know. I mean, how many people just went like, Zeitgeist, yes, I've got to be there. Weltanschauung.
Not so much.
Okay, well, this panel actually kind of started way back when I was an undergraduate, and I was taking German because I thought I had to know German as a qualifying for my PhD program. So I suffered through 18th century German literature, all this kind of stuff. I mean, I really wasn't, I'm not a language person, but these two words were just kind of cool German words. And so, so I was asked, what panel should I do? And I was like, yeah, Zeitgeist and Weltanschauung of video games. So I'm going like, yeah, this is really going to be fun.
You should do that the whole panel.
I know.
Is that Swedish or German?
It is a combination of Swedish and Deutsch. Okay, I can't do it. Maybe I'll get into it. So let's see, where do we go to from here? So I've got a wonderful panel, and I think it's going to actually open up into hopefully a really good dialogue about video games and what they're telling us and what we tell them. There have been a lot of really interesting panels that we've been on and coming out of in culture and art, and this is hopefully going to put another edge on it, hopefully box things in maybe a little bit. So I've got three wonderful panelists, and let me start down here at my right, your left, Catherine Hemmen from George Mason University, and we'll kind of introduce ourselves in a second. Then Kirk Norman, who doesn't really look like me, but he is my son, and me, Kent Norman. So let's go ahead and start.
All right.
Catherine.
Hi, so thank you for that introduction. My name is Catherine Hemmen, and I teach courses about books and comic books at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. George Mason also has a fantastic game development program that offers an MFA as well. And a lot of my students are kind of super into these courses about Japan that I teach, and I'm very happy to announce that I just got a course approved with the university called Video Games and Japan, so I'm excited about that. My current project is a book manuscript called Writing Women Readers, Female Cultures, or Manga Cultures and the Female Gaze, which is about women and fandom, and it's forthcoming from University of Hawaii Press next summer. So if you've ever wanted to read a book about Cloud and Sephiroth smashing their faces together, like I am writing that book. So I myself am a huge Nintendo fangirl, and I'm already taking baby steps into my next research project, which is essentially this panel in terms of Japanese video games. So I'm talking about worldview and culture, especially concerning ecological themes in The Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Super Mario, and the Mother series. So wish me luck, and it's my honor to be here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, my name is Kirk Norman. I'm from the University of Maryland, Baltimore campus. I'm in human-computer interaction, and I've actually taken some German too, and I've been fascinated by the idea of what's happening now and the worldview and why these appear in games.
Okay, and once again, I'm Kent Norman. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland for way too many years. My research has been on human-computer interaction, and all the kind of human factors stuff for years and years and years, studying how people use computers. And then I realized, hey, a video game is a computer. It's a console, and PCs are computers, they're consoles, so why not study video games? So I also got a course approved about 7 years ago on the psychology of video games. So I have so much fun teaching that, It is like one of the only psych courses that like has a wait list longer than the number of people that can get into the class. Two of my students are right down there. Yeah.
You have a book, right?
Well, I've got a book. It's called Cyber Psychology, published in 2008. It is obsolete. Don't buy it.
What?
Yeah, because I'm finishing the second edition, which will actually be up to date, and it's going to have a whole chapter on video games, of course, a whole chapter on virtual reality and those sorts of stuff. So, but that won't be out for a year or two. Yeah, so this is my lab where we do all kinds of weird stuff, and so digital gaming has popped to the top icon of what we do. Okay, enough. So Zeitgeist. So we're not going to use the term Zeitgeist, I think, for the whole panel. But it's, oh, okay, well,
Let's do it.
you know, so basically it's the spirit of the age. It's sort of like the way in which we view things. It's intellect, it's kind of fashion, it's all kinds of ways of thinking that we think are appropriate for today. And video games, I mean, in a second we'll see how, well, I mean, Zeitgeist comes out in art, it comes out in literature, it's the way in which we think and kind of fashion the world. And so, so George Hegel, anybody George Hegel fans? All right. So the previous panel was on art. He basically believed that art reflected by its very nature the culture of the time, so the zeitgeist in which it was created. And so art and culture are kind of inextricable. You can't separate the two. And it's really much truer, really, for video games because it's in the time, it's of the technology of today. So video games express the zeitgeist. There's been a lot of zeitgeist in the past. You know, if we read history, there was a zeitgeist of feudalism, colonialism, communism, logical positivism was my favorite. I was a behaviorist for a long time. I'm not a capitalist, though capitalism seems to be reigning these days. And the second whole kind of genre of zeitgeist is the technology. We're really kind of an age, a culture of technology. You know, we're all into space travel. It's finally, you know, happening. It's been privatized. Social media, that's our zeitgeist. Cybersecurity, robotics. And like at the University of Maryland, innovation is our theme. It's our zeitgeist. You know, the University of Maryland, innovation, that's what we do. And other things in gender equality, diversity, globalization, everything, correctness. Somehow I just don't know how Trump fits into the zeitgeist today. I'm sorry.
He's a maverick. He's a loner, Dottie, a rebel.
There you go.
His hairpiece is majestic.
He has his own specific zeitgeist.
Yeah, unique.
Zeitgeist.
So in video games, you can. I think if you picked up any video game, you should be able to say what is kind of the spirit, what is the spirit of this age that this is either representing or that this was done in. So Tycoon, Railroad Tycoon. Anybody ever play Railroad Tycoon? Okay. You know, expansion of the country, development. That was like really important. One of my favorite games, L.A. Noire. You know, crime, you know, just the morality of that age. Yeah, and Watch Dogs. I love Watch Dogs, and it's so this whole new zeitgeist of cybersecurity and crime, and you know, now we crack things through stealth and stuff, but it still has guns in it. So that was my mistake. And let's see. World War II games, Call of Duty, etc. And then, you know, Left 4 Dead has its own zeitgeist. We're talking about apocalyptic things. And how many people are playing Witcher 3? Okay. It's not the zeitgeist of today, but it's fun to go into those kind of other spirits of the past, of the feudal ages and different kingdoms and lords and magic and stuff like that. And so I asked Catherine if she had some other ones.
So Zeitgeist is something that we generally associate with culture, and especially national culture. But even though it's becoming more international, it's fun to track the zeitgeist of other countries that produce video games, and especially Japan. And I was thinking, what is the best kind of ongoing way to do this? And I think you could apply Zeitgeist to any video game series. There's no way that culture and the spirit of the times doesn't affect something. Whether it's the popularity of D&D affecting like Dragon Quest or the first Final Fantasy in the early 1990s, right? But I think three really examples of Zeitgeist in video games that in Japan especially are in the Final Fantasy series. So the first I want to look at is Final Fantasy VII, which was released in 1997, a little bit less than 2 years after the Kyoto Protocol. What the Kyoto Protocol was a bunch of nations coming together in the Japanese city of Kyoto and essentially agreeing to, I guess, limit carbon emissions. And the United States, shamefully, was not one of them, right? But there was this big, after that happened, it was so widely publicized that people started talking about, especially nuclear energy in Japan. And as you might imagine, because of certain events that happened in 1945, Japan has I guess, complicated relationship with nuclear power, right? Mm-hmm. So when we think about the Shinra Electric Company and these magical Mako reactors that are destroying the planet, I think that's a direct reflection of the public discourse surrounding the Kyoto Protocol. So the next one is Final Fantasy X. Which was released in 2001, and this is right after the renewal of a U.S.-Japan security treaty that had been in place since the end of World War II. The United States has several military bases around Japan, the most prominent of which are in Okinawa. So when this treaty came up for, I guess, renegotiation, people in Okinawa did not want it to happen. First of all, because the United States has nuclear submarines, again, weird relationship with nuclear power, but also because there were a series of incidents on these U.S. military bases that were, I guess, not received well by the local population. So what happened in I guess, around the year 2000, 1998, 1999, 2000, is there was a strong resurgence in interest in Okinawan culture, music, travel, cuisine, and so on and so forth. So when it came time to make another Final Fantasy game, they're like, well, why not have that Okinawan culture pervading the sensibility of the game? And while we're at it, why not have this kind of religiously motivated, militaristic power kind of wreaking havoc through the land? So that's us, by the way. So the third example, I want to say that there are cultures within cultures. So Final Fantasy XII is a really interesting example of the zeitgeist of the video game industry. So people at Square Enix were afraid, what if Japanese video games are on the decline while American-made, I suppose Western MMO RPGs are on the rise. So everything from the setting to the play style to the combat system of Final Fantasy XII is a reflection of the zeitgeist of the larger video game industry, which was becoming increasingly international. So I think in terms of in-depth examples of zeitgeist, not just in American games, but Japanese games, the Final Fantasy series is really ripe for scholarly inquiry and interpretation. Yeah?
Yeah. Did you have any zeitgeist?
Oh, you can move on.
All right. So these are just some of our examples, and I'd just like to open it up to the audience to see if you guys have any things to say about it. Yes? Go ahead.
Well, I guess I didn't understand the definition before perfectly, but is the zeitgeist a certain period of time, or it's kind of up in the air?
Well, it's really
It's kind of both.
I mean,
both. It's the spirit of the time.
yeah, and it just depends on which time we're talking about. If we're talking about today, that would be we talk about the zeitgeist of today or the zeitgeist.
Reconcile it, and I don't know how to say the whole name of the Japanese Constitution
Yeah.
Hate it. You know, like the renunciation of this course is solving the problems. I wonder if there are any games that comment on that, because I always find that to be a real affirmation of making the right call, and especially the future of humanity.
Metal Gear Solid.
I know which one you say. Okay, it's on my list. But yeah, that, you know what I'm talking about, like as a zeitgeist. That.
No, I think my colleague at the University of Delaware, Rachel Hutchinson, who has a lot of her material open access online, has written about that, especially Final Fantasy X and ideas of nuclear disarmament, first of all. And second of all, Metal Gear Solid and these political zeitgeists and military-focused discourse that was going on in Japan through the 90s to the present day. So again, her name is Rachel Hutchinson, and she's really big into that. I highly recommend her work. Yeah.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, that's right. So it's sort of like serious games are, that have those ideas are starting to creep into the AAA games as well. Yeah. Mhm.
There's another channel I went to here that was focusing on DLC in video games.
Yeah.
One of the biggest like surges that have been a big example has been called Undertale.
Yeah.
Not only because it focuses on possible LGBT characters, but it also brings in ideas of queer mechanics and something that's like a non-binary system with either one way or the other.
Right.
You can have people who identify as neither or identify as both and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, that wouldn't have been possible without Homestuck, right? Among other things, and Homestuck wouldn't have been possible without, I think around 2009, this surge in interest, cultural interest, this zeitgeist in the United States with webcomics and also at the same time retro gaming, right? So it's kind of a cycle that feeds itself, thankfully. But thank you for mentioning Undertale. That is a perfect example.
Yeah. Up here, Hopkins.
One of the things was the zeitgeist of the Roaring Twenties Bioshock.
Definitely.
Utilitarianism, and I think it's probably using twenties as a reflection of the American as a conservative leadership that we had in the late 2000s.
Absolutely.
I think oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say a good example would probably be like Modern Warfare 3, Battlefield 3, you know, when they're doing the whole invasion of the U.S.
Yes.
Because service tensions were very high, and Homefront, stuff like that.
Yeah, but the thing to worry about there is zeitgeist. It's difficult to separate, what's coming from grassroots culture and real cultural movements, and what's sort of being sponsored, right, by various interests with a great deal of capital, let's say. So is that something that's coming from the zeitgeist, or is it in fact feeding and creating the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah, and it's wonderful in this country. I don't think that the video game industry is controlled by our government. Anybody think it is? All right. Way back there.
One example I'm thinking of is that because of the recent concerns about Japan's place in the world and the possible abolition of Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, there's a lot of what appears to be real imperialism. And there's a cell phone game called Fruit Collection that is
Yeah.
about collecting huge Japanese abolition photos.
Wow.
Yeah. And which is sort of taps into a sort of revisionist history as well.
That's complicated. Thank you.
And I think also what's interesting about Zeitgeist is that, especially if we look at MMORPGs or some of the other very non-linear games, if we're looking at the Witcher 3 or Skyrim or games like that. So there was a kind of a slow turn from kind of quest-based, everything moved from one place to another to these wide open games. So I think that's fascinating as sort of spirit of those games has grown.
Yeah. Yeah, Rosa?
I think also one game that kind of exemplifies this is a lot is Life is Strange, because we've seen a big increase in like attention toward like mental health and like just kind of the attention and awareness toward these kind of problems that like teenagers like we face, and it was kind of shied away from before.
Yeah.
But that's kind of helping bring it more to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Okay, one more and then we'll move on. Let's see, way back, I think you had your hand up first, you in the red.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, all these games now with poisoning,
Right. Yeah, I mean, that is really an interesting aspect, because the whole zeitgeist today is that we should be able to make the choices. It shouldn't just be a linear game,
Right.
that we are led down the path like a lot of platformer games. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next German word. Let's all say it together. Weltanschauung. Actually, my German pronunciation wasn't that great, I was told by my teacher, but my comprehension was good. So Weltanschauung is really your worldview. It's kind of the all-encompassing, fundamental way in which you think, orientation, and it's both of the, it can be thought of as an individual, your worldview, or a society's worldview. So sometimes it'll waffle between those two, and it also kind of ripples in with the spirit of the age, the Zeitgeist. So they can be a little, overlapping, but it includes a lot of the ways in which you just think about stuff. So your philosophy, the ways, your existential view of the world, the way you do logic, all of your emotions and ethics. So there's this one guy, James W. Sir, who says it's like a real commitment and orientation of the heart that can be expressed in a story or a set of presuppositions, which might be conscious. You might be conscious of this stuff, or it might be subconscious. A lot of us have viewpoints that we really don't bring to the surface, but us psychologists can figure out what they are. And it's the basic construction of how you form reality. And it's interesting because he says we should all think in terms of worldviews. That is, with a consciousness not only of our own way of thought, but also that of other people. Okay? So that we can first understand and then genuinely communicate with others in our pluralistic society. We always have to remember, everybody on this panel has a different worldview to an extent. We share a lot of commonality because we're in the American kind of worldview, but we all have a different context as well because of maybe our religious upbringing, our neighborhood, our family, our particular age, and so
just,
that
or just specific brain patterns.
Yeah, the fact that I'm left-handed, I have a different Weltanschauung than right-handed people. That's why Kirk is on the panel. He's left-handed as well, and that's why we're sitting on this side, so we're not smacking each other.
How about that? There was a plan.
Okay, so just kind of a couple more points and the kind of boring things on the slides. So it's like natural philosophy, fundamental existentialism. I already mentioned all these. So one kind of example of this is some people have this totally unidirectional view of causality. Everything goes from the beginning to the end. There was a creation, there's going to be an apocalypse and an end, and that's it. And that's shared by Christianity, Judaism, Islam. But other worldviews are cyclical. So there's the reincarnation cycles. Even if our universe ends, there's going to be another big bang. Everything will be cyclical. So
Yeah, I'd like to add to that a little bit. I gave a panel this morning with Kirk, actually, about, I guess, post-apocalyptic, post-humanism in video games. And one of our arguments is that in Japanese games, the end of the world is not necessarily such a bad thing, right? There are all sorts of games, like The Last of Us is a good example, in which the apocalypse is a terrible, frightening thing in which society collapses and people are frightened all the time and have to fight for their lives. But in a lot of Japanese games, the examples I used are Final Fantasy VI, The Wind Waker, Tokyo Jungle. The apocalypse is really associated with these cute avatars of destruction, like animals, Toon Link, Tara Branford, so the Bishojo, the beautiful young woman. And that's because of what I would argue is this Buddhist worldview that nothing really ends, right? It's not teleological. There's no end point. There's just a cycle. So there's regeneration and, I guess, destruction. So this is definitely like something, a way in which these various social and religious currents affect video games, yeah.
So the way in which world views are conveyed in video games are often through the narrative, historical, what culture, who are the bad guys, who are the good guys, game mechanics, the way in which the story progresses with or without choices, even the physics of it, the space-time relationships within the game, whether it's two-dimensional, one-dimensional, we get into 2.5 dimensions. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Pong is sort of one-dimensional in the sense I can only move my paddle to the left or right. And then the kind of characters that are involved in it and their viewpoints. So, a diagram. So we've got game designers over here on the left. They've got a worldview. They work for a company, but they have their own lives, and they create game ideas and game engines, and then they intend to put some kind of a worldview into that game that they're writing, and those two can be meshed, they can be separate. So we go through all of the things in the middle, how they're actually instantiated within the game. And then the player comes along, and every player has their own different worldview. So, I might not like this particular game because I don't like this history story, or I don't like this game mechanic, I want something different. I don't like games that I have to pay to play through, even things like that. And so I get a perceived worldview as well out of that game. So now the odd thing I want to do is sort of take some random video games and just look at what do you think the worldview would be from playing this game or within this game. Sometimes you have to view from the character's point of view of what is the worldview of my character. Pac-Man. Okay, we'll start basic, very retro. So what's the geometry? I mean, this is like a two-dimensional world. I can only move left, right, up, down at any intersection. It's very boxy, constrained, but I do have choices. I can move in different patterns. You as a player, however, have a different worldview. You have the God's eye worldview of being able to look down on this puppet that you're moving around. And of course, then worldviews have like, what is my purpose in life? And so, obviously, I need to avoid the ghosts and munch down everything else.
There's also, like, in terms of Pac-Man, there's a really interesting worldview in there, which is that the people at Namco really wanted to bring female gamers into arcades, right? Mm-hmm. So Pac-Man was developed in order to, I guess, promote that goal. So what sort of, like, female gendered worldview is expressed in Pac-Man? So what these male developers are sort of sitting around thinking about is like, well, women like cherries and sweet things and eating pizza and bright colors. So if we put all of these things in our game, the worldview that's expressed here will be more welcoming to, I guess, a broader audience, right? So this is something that game developers are actively trying to promote through their design, right?
Right, and so then they came out with Ms. Pac-Man. And the pizza parlor right down from my house had Ms. Pac-Man until the new owner, he got rid of it. I used to spend so much time playing that machine.
It's the better game.
I agree. I agree. So, I mean, me as a male can enjoy playing Ms. Pac-Man, and play the different worldview. Okay, Tetris. How can you have a worldview in Tetris? So there's obviously everything is constrained in this worldview. It's limited geometry, left, right, spin. Again, the bird's eye sort of view over this. And I've got this worldview I've got to fit in. Your whole plan in life is to make everything arranged properly to fit. And that's kind of an interesting worldview. So, and then the sad thing is, no matter what, there's an ultimate failure. You never win the game because it's, one of those endless games. You can only die, but with a high score. So Pokemon, we'll move on to something else. And any Pokemon players here? I mean, I had not played Pokemon until my students said, Dr. Norman, either you play Pokemon or we're going to turn you in. So, yes, X and Y.
I think it's really interesting how the worldview of the designer and player has to mesh. Because let's say the worldview of, even if it's basic, of Tetris, if you aren't a puzzle fan, or if you don't want to play a game and a thought like that, and arrange shapes, then you're automatically not going to be interested.
Yeah, that is actually an excellent point, because in my lab we actually look for why people prefer different video games, and a lot of it has to do with your personality, and a lot of it has to do with your worldview. If you just don't fit in with this worldview, you feel like you're an alien. It just doesn't work for you. And so it'd almost be interesting to have like a video game worldview profile.
You should do that. You should construct a typology, right? So like the personality types according to like video game preferences. So like you should have like an online sort of quiz that people can take to like fit them into this. I bet
Yeah, I mean there is the Bartel test. If anybody's seen the Bartel test
What is it?
for video game, I think there are different dimensions of explorer versus collector.
Right.
And in my lab, some of my students worked on the Big Five personality test and mapped those to preferences. Like, if you're an introvert, you don't want to play Dance Central.
Oh, too bad. They're missing out.
Okay, so more on Pokemon.
So Pokemon, I'm a big Pokemon nerd. Sorry, hello. So one of the interesting things is that video games can be used to encourage worldview. And one of the things that the developers at Nintendo were trying to do is they were trying to make video games more social. So in the Legend of Zelda series, the first 3 games, I'd say, back before the internet, when nobody really knew what was going on, you did not know what was going on in those games, right? It was really difficult to figure out how to solve, I guess, the puzzles in the temples, how to even get to the next dungeon, right? And the only way that you could figure this out was by talking to other gamers. So as strategy guides proliferated, as the sort of internet became a big thing internationally, right, Nintendo was like, well, how do we get people back outside? How do we we get people talking to each other about video games? So the project, their flagship project actually, to encourage this sort of worldview that gaming should be something that's social, was the Pokemon games, right? So in order to encourage this worldview, not just through gameplay features, for example, trading individual Pokemon creatures between systems, they also constructed the world of the game to reflect the sort of joy of being outside. So the world of the Pokemon games is very just filled with nature. The player is going through, I guess, caves and forests and like these roads outside that don't even have any cars on them, right? So it's like the world is your playground if you're a 10-year-old boy going out into it. And even the cities, such as the one pictured here, are just filled with greenery. So something that, so Americans, scholars, academics especially, have looked at the Pokemon games and said, well, this is very capitalistic. The games are encouraging you to consume. You gotta catch them all. Get all the Pokemon. And this is not, in fact, incorrect, right? But if you could switch the slide. So the way that Japanese elementary and middle school students learn about nature, learn about the natural world, are through these picture books that are called Zukan, right? So a Pokemon Zukan is translated as a Pokédex, like a Pokemon index. And so Zukan are essentially what you're seeing up there. It's a way of picturing an animal and getting all the facts about animals and like studying these things as a method of scientific inquiry that you can then go out into the world and identify creatures when you see them. So the idea of a Zukan and completing a Zukan is not so much catch all the things, spend more money like Nintendo is God, right? But actually it sort of feeds into the Japanese zeitgeist, right? Of kind of being curious about the natural world. And this worldview is encouraged through many, many aspects of design and gameplay in the Pokemon series.
Okay, so Super Paper Mario is kind of an interesting worldview. It's talking about the different geometries. So it's kind of goes between two-dimensional world and then flipping into a three-dimensional world every once in a while. Yeah. And so it's often described as a 2.5D game. Mm. And the idea, you know, good and evil always kind of can enter into games. Bowser is not absolutely evil, okay? This is like, you know, can that be true? Can Satan not be absolutely evil? Isn't there an absolute evil? Maybe there's things that we thought were absolute that might not be absolute.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like flippage, right? And the visual design, it's sort of playing on this concept of a two-dimensional worldview, a dualistic worldview. You have to be one or the other, right? But the art direction of this game is just challenging this in such an interesting way. And we think like, oh, Super Mario, how deep is it, right? The truth is, it's actually pretty deep, yeah?
Yeah, and I think the fact that it forces you to look at things in two different ways. So, you know, it may slightly broaden a worldview or allow you to think beyond the two-dimensional. Like, I didn't see this from this point of view.
Yeah, so this is what, you know, in a sense, a lot of these games are pushing our worldviews, and this is really wonderful. A lot of the indie games in particular stretch this, and this is a good thing. I mean, it's not like, you know, we're having you explore different, you know, drugs.
You can just play Mario.
Yeah.
So this isn't Harvard in the 60s, and 50s, I mean.
And then there's, you know, interesting, strange worldviews that can be developed. I started playing the Talus Principle. How many people have heard of the Talus Principle? You know, so I got it, you know, because it was $39.95, and then there was this, Steam had a special, $9.99. Yes, click.
Click.
What a wonderful world. That's a worldview in and of itself, video game purchasing.
Maybe that's just bad decision making, Professor Psychologist.
Well, and then all of the Tomb Raider games were bundled together for like $19.99.
Gotta catch
Click.
them all, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
That's how they get you.
Yeah, so So yeah, it's a three-dimensional world. It's an open world space. In most of our lives, we want to know we have a purpose, or at least we're searching for a purpose. And in this game, this is a robot character who's sort of sentient, who is created, who's trying to figure out what's going on. And in order to figure out what's going on, it has to solve various puzzles going through, which ultimately, I haven't gotten that far. Don't tell me how it ends. But it is this idea of a path to enlightenment and instructions, my son.
One of my favorites.
You want to say anything about it?
Certainly.
Okay, so the world ends with you. I don't know why I played this game.
Because I had it. When I was young.
Because he had it. And I don't know, it just captivated me. I couldn't put it down. It was like so amazing. I had to get through all of the days of the week, and then, oh no, another week. And I hate noise. I want to save energy and turn all the noise sources off, the fans, you name it, turn it all off. I don't like noise. So.
And that's how you got into anime. Oh, geez.
But it also has this worldview that we're looking for the truth. What really happened to me? What's going on? Why am I here? That continues to be a worldview, and I think video games are really, really kind of an interesting platform for that kind of search of why are we here? For that matter, why am I playing this game? But the thing, this is something I've got to say this. In my class, I basically say, okay, you can play a lot of video games, and people often say video games are a mindless waste of time. But they're not if you think about this game. So the unanalyzed game, okay, so Plato said, the unanalyzed, I don't remember what he said originally. Yes, the unanalyzed life is not worth living. To us, the unanalyzed video game is not worth playing. So think about this game, reflect on it. What's going on in this game? And it also has this nice worldview of cooperation between people. You can't sort of beat it on your own. And this issue of cooperation, I think, is like a new worldview that's coming into a lot of games.
I think also it's interesting because you're not just you're searching for the truth, but you are a character that is confused, that doesn't want to deal with other people, and then slowly has to change in order to move forward.
And I'm going to end with Fallout.
As one does.
As one does. It is the end. Okay, so worldview of everything is open. I can run all over the place and do stuff, but I have these missions to do. Obviously, post-apocalyptic. The world is full of humans, robots. How do I tell the difference? What do I do in this kind of a situation? Want to say anything else about?
What, Fallout?
Yeah, Fallout. Yeah. No, and then there's Fallout 4. Is that about the same? I haven't played Fallout 4.
Yeah, I have something. I think starting in 2007, the United States as a society became really interested in post-apocalyptic scenarios, which obviously predate 2007 by quite a long bit, right? But Alan Weisman wrote a book called The World Without Us, so kind of imagining what would happen to the relics of human civilization if people just vanished, right? And why would people just vanish? How permanent are we? So this started, I think, this kind of cultural fascination in mainstream media and cinema, even like Discovery Channel specials, right? What is the apocalypse? What is the Anthropocene, human-dominated era? And what happens at the end of it, right? So one of the cool things...
So many books.
So many books. And one of the cool things about video games, I think, is we're not just on the outside sort of looking into the apocalypse. We can actually live the apocalypse. And I mean, let's be honest, like how many hours have we all put into Fallout 4 in the past like 3 months, right? I don't even want to give a count. But so, I mean, my engagement with post-apocalyptic Boston is, even if I'm not thinking deeply about it, just by the act of moving through the game, I think, I'm forced to engage with that mindset, that worldview, that set of ideas. What is the apocalypse exactly? How did we get here? How could we prevent it? And actually, what sort of potentials does it present to us? So I really think, you know, even if you're not doing quote unquote important intellectual labor by gaming, right? Just the identification with the avatar character does a lot of emotional and effective work. Yeah?
Yeah. So can you think of any other games you'd like to mention with worldview? Yes, earphones?
More question. Do you think that, do you know if post-apocalyptic video games, this one, are successful in countries actually rising up? I'm thinking about China, to compare with countries like in Europe or even US, I mean, compared to China.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a good question. I don't know about China. That's
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh my goodness, right? So it's gotten to the point where people are sort of taking pictures of the air pollution in cities like Beijing, and they're photoshopping it to look like something out of Fallout with direct visual references. So they're saying, you know, they're really, you know, connecting their lives with what they're seeing in this work of art. And in the same way, in Japan, after the March 2011 disaster, there was a wave of post-apocalyptic video games, almost as if, you know, there was a collective zeitgeist or a collective consciousness working through trauma by means of art, by means of video games. And I don't want to make these overgeneralizations and say that, you know, what applies to the culture applies to every single individual, but I don't think it's something that's specific to the United States and the countries in Europe, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And India as well, they're facing pollution higher levels than Beijing.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
One very interesting example of worldview in a video game is Gone Home, where, for anyone who hasn't played it, you are a college student returning to an empty house, and the game is your discovery of what happened while you were away. And you discover the worldview of other characters not through interaction with them, but through interacting with the things they left behind. And it's, I think, worth playing to anybody.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have friends with conflicting worldviews that say, this isn't a game. It's a story where you walk around.
Yeah. I cried so hard, so many times. That game hit me right in the feels. It was like a barrage, like combo attack to my heart. Gone Home. Yeah, highly recommend it. And I think there's kind of the derogatory label of walking simulators, right? There's this worldview of maybe video games can be things other than, you know, I guess direct narratives, and they can be other things other than demonstrations of skill, right? And so there's been a strong resistance against that worldview regarding video games and expressed through that video games in this derogatory label, walking simulators, as if you're doing nothing more than being on a treadmill looking at scenery. So why not call them something else, like, you know, like exploration games or something? So there are definitely in games like Gone Home two conflicting worldviews sort of surrounding the actual gameplay and world of the game. That's a fantastic example. Thank you.
Yes, right here in the middle.
Wow. Really?
game that takes place sort of in a like central Germany during World War II. It's a 2D exploration survival game where you have yourself and, well, you have a group of characters
So
Yeah,
the war
good.
of the mind, or this war of the mind, this war of the mind. Excellent.
Yes, way in the back. Yes, you. Yeah, you're sort of in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, right.
Thank
You had a question? No. Yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make a comment about the stark contrast in worldview expressed by games that use it. Here's an example of in the beginning, Final Fantasy VII, and games like Fallout, Borderlands, all this sort of, even some of the films that are coming out, like Mad Max, right? Like the living and living after the end of humanity, right? Which is kind of paradoxical saying. Yeah, I think that the earlier games definitely, like Final Fantasy VII, expressed this worldview, this sort of ecological position of, the reason why everything horrible is going on in the world is because we're out of balance with nature, right? We've been exploiting nature, we've been, setting up these reactors that are sucking out, nature or whatever. And it had like this very idea of the problem with our world is that we've gotten out of balance with nature, as opposed to more contemporary games like Fallout and all these other games, which are kind of playful celebrations in the aftermath of us
Right.
really destroying the world, right? It's like, yes, we've completely trashed our environment, but there's still something beautiful and hilarious and joyful in living in
Right.
after the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Um, that even in, for example, in Fallout, you go out and you're taking pills and taking all kinds of stimulants and things
Killing
to
rad
manage your
scorpions.
radioactivity level, right? Some people would see that as criticism or see that as kind of
Depressing.
making fun of our sort of cavalier, I guess, attitude towards taking care of the earth, but I think it's actually the opposite. It's a testament to, no, we really could have medicines one day that will make, make the idea of living in harmony with nature irrelevant. Right? Like, we don't have to have that same worldview expressed by earlier games. We can live in this sort of post-apocalyptic era and find a way to make it.
Yeah, you're right. Technology, medicine, science is drastically changing our worldview. Robotics, you name it, all the stuff that we're creating.
Yeah, one of our arguments for the earlier panel, kind of on post-humanism, is that video games in a lot of important ways are training us to kind of embrace these futures, right? Futures that don't look like the present, futures in which human beings, through various technologies, are rendered post-human, right? And I think we discussed there's something about the identification with the Abadar character and the embracing of a fractured self, right? That makes us more, I guess, amenable to and open to different possibilities. So I think, not just the narratives expressed in games, both through the story and gameplay, but also the very act of playing video games can change our worldviews, especially considering these very contemporary issues like what's going to happen with climate change, right? Or what's going to happen with these kind of international tensions, yeah.
Tell us to, panic, to do everything we can to try to avert the end of the world, versus these that are just saying, well, just kind of accept it as too late, right? Like, how are we going to deal with the fact that it may be too late to do anything about climate change?
Yeah, and what are we going to do now, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating to me that kind of ever since the Cold War we've had this idea, and I think that there is sort of a happiness to Fallout, but at the same time, I mean, there's no way to walk, for me at least, to walk through some of the barren places, especially in Fallout 3, as I'm walking through the metro stations, and not to feel something, despite the fact that we might have things to help with radiation and things. I mean, it's still horribly depressing. We've destroyed our world. 90% of the plus population is gone.
Yeah, so we've got pre-apocalyptic games, we've got post-apocalyptic games. What about apocalyptic games?
We don't have enough of those.
Where you're in the apocalypse. Everything is crushing around you, and a third of the sea is dead, and a third of mankind has just
Oh, that's
died.
a quick game, though. Boom.
Oh,
You're
it's got levels to it, though. Right behind Hopkins. Yeah.
And that happens. Yeah. Or watching a cop beat someone.
Yeah.
So I have killed so many cops, personally. I had such a good time. And this I think is... Hello, federal government.
I've done something worse than that.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about the things I've done.
No, you know what's
Grand Theft Auto.
worse than shooting a cop?
Let's not talk about that. Let's not put that on to...
You know what's worse than shooting a cop?
Shooting two cops?
No, shooting a dog.
Oh, and what's worse than shooting a dog?
Well, I won't go there.
Shooting a pile of dogs.
No, I
What's
was
worse
playing.
than that?
I was playing. Yeah,
No. Oh!
there we go.
Snap, right?
No, there I was. I was playing Red Dead Redemption, riding along on my horse, and I just randomly decide to shoot a dog.
And then you eat your horse, right? No, but what I'm trying to say here is that we also need to take all of this with a grain of salt. Certainly, video games are trying to push a worldview onto us, subtly or unsubtly. They also reflect the spirit of the times, but all of us, have individual agency. We have our own decision-making capacities, right? So I think there are some times when video games, depending on how we play them, can just be pure escapism. They can be tools that are deeper than a kind of surface reading of the worldview would lead us to believe, right? So I think this is a question that's really open for inquiry and further work. And as our generation, kind of the video game generation, starts writing, I'm looking forward to these kind of questions being explored. So what worldview actually is, being expressed in Grand Theft Auto? It's so easy to say, yay, violence, right? But underneath that, what's going on exactly?
Yeah.
I would
So
say-
okay.
I would say sarcasm. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, and actually a lot of it in Grand Theft Auto is just doing stunts. I mean, it's sort of like achieving stuff. I had Grand Theft Auto set up in my class, and one of a really good player took control of it, and he just showed how he could ride through, grab a gun, kill some cops, and then I said, he was doing so well. I said, okay, so we got to stop here so I can continue the class and lecture. And so what he did was he jumped out of the car and committed suicide. The car ran over him.
It's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool. It's so cool because it was so amazing that he did it. Yeah. So kind of want to close a bit and then, maybe more questions, but it's so really interesting when I talk to people my age, because I'm a little bit older than most of the people here, and they say, oh yeah, video games, they're so bad, the kids are addicted to them, it's causing violence. It's like this negative worldview of video games, how they are destroying the young people today. And then I'm going yeah, but the average age of a gamer is 40.
31.
I think it's older, isn't it?
No, you're still young. We're not old yet.
But it's getting older and older as we grow. And there's a lot of, and the other weird thing is a lot of people will not admit to their coworkers that they play video games. It's sort of like something, it's a little weird. But that is changing. So there is becoming a new zeitgeist and very positive things about, that video game players have really more positive attributes. They have a wider set of experiences. They have obviously better eye-hand coordination, problem-solving skills, perceptual skills, cognitive reasoning. I mean, it's just across the board, scores and scores of studies that are showing that video game players have amazing skills. It's like for me, if I were hiring somebody for a job, I would say, what video games do you play? And how well do you do it? Yeah. And the military is, unfortunately, the military in particular is very interested in that because that's sort of what they do. A video game is, just flying a drone.
Yeah, so it would be good to close, like my closing statement would be that anybody can make a video game. Absolutely anybody. You don't need any sort of programming expertise to play around with something like Twine or RPG Maker, right? Anybody can make a video game. It's becoming a demographic medium. So there are various game jams being organized out of places like this very convention, also out of the University of Maryland, also out of George Mason University, places like Indiana University, the Ohio State University, Washington State University. There are just all these really cool places that are hosting events where people come together over one specific theme, message, worldview, or interpretation of larger gaming culture, and anyone can participate in these. So if you have something that you want to add to the larger culture, to the worldview, right? I would encourage you to just go ahead and do it. It's free, it's fun, and the community is awesome, right?
Yeah, amen.
Okay,
All right.
we'll end there. Thank you very, very much, Catherine and Kirk, and you guys out there.